Heinz is proud to partner The Urbanist on Monocle Radio. Heinz is a leading global real estate investment manager. Heinz owns and operates $93 billion of assets across property types and on behalf of a diverse group of institutional and private wealth clients. Heinz' ambition? Well, in the words of its chairman and CEO Jeffrey Heinz, to be the best real estate investor, manager and partner in the world. Find out how Heinz is making that dream a reality. Head to heinz.com now. Heinz, a leader in real estate investing and management since 1957.
Hello and welcome to The Urbanist, Monocle's program all about the built environment. I'm your host, Carlota Rebelo. We're at the World Economic Forum's annual meeting this week to hear where our cities are headed next. From creating more resilient cities to the power architecture can have to lift a community, we'll be unpacking why we should all be hopeful about life in urban areas. We'll hear from Anna Claudia Hosbach, the Executive Director of UN Habitat, and sit down with Pritzker Prize winner Riken Yamamoto.
It's I would like to say, the symbol of the community. People come back to the community with architecture.
Plus, WEF's own head of urban transformation Jeff Merritt and Heinz's global chief investment officer David Steinbach. All that and more ahead in the next 30 minutes in a special edition of The Urbanist from Davos with me, Carlota Rebelo. It's that time of the year again when global leaders, CEOs and heads of NGOs all flock to the Swiss town of Davos for the World Economic Forum's annual meeting. It's a busy affair with over 3,000 registered participants and many others attending sessions on the sidelines. In order to accommodate everyone, Davos temporarily transforms. Shops are taken over, traffic is diverted and security zones are put in place. Monocle's contributing editor, Jessica Bridger, unpacks the transformation that happens in Davos when WEF is in town.
Happening just around the corner, across the street, on the phone call of the guy sitting next to you in the train. The town of 11,000 swells to about 20,000 with suited, booted, and polished people. 2,800 of these are official attendees, a few thousand more are unofficial, and about 5,000 are military. As a popular ski resort, Davos is well suited to this influx. Helicopters thrum above, transporting high-profile people into Davos's restricted flight bubble, a radius of about 45 kilometers around the town, including parts of Switzerland, Liechtenstein, Italy, and Austria, is reserved for authorized helicopter travel only. The rest travel by train and car, winding their way up the picturesque Prattigau Valley. In town, shuttle buses shuttle, and black vans ply the muddy streets. This year is about collaboration. Collaboration for the intelligent age is the official theme, in a global context that seems spectacularly uncollaborative. Worries about armed conflict and trade tensions top the list of worries. The news seems universally grim. We are living in an era when we witness a lot of destruction in our built environment. Wars, terrorist attacks, bleached coral, firestorms ripping through the golden arches of a McDonald's in LA. Yet in Davos, the promenade, Davos's main street, is the cheerful center of the open-access, hyper-capitalistic public face of the annual WEF event. This is transformed for WEF, from a mundane town strip in need of a lick of paint and refurbishment to a fake facade, backlit sign, urban fun park. Slogans are huge in Davos. Impossible is possible. Supercharging progress. Here for good. Progress made possible. To the chunky sales pitches like future humans with agents drive customer service together, and even corporate questions to cue existential crises. Who knows what the intelligent age holds for you? The WEF Circus, the events outside of the excellent official Congress Hall conference sessions, have been derided over the years. It is true that much of this WEF sideshow, the flash of temporary facades from Amazon and Meta, is, in many ways, not its best aspect. But perhaps we're missing the forest for the trees. The WEF in Davos this year bravely keeps things positive, if not optimistic. The public spaces of the town, transformed for this week in January, are proof. WEF creates amazing temporary spaces for the open exchange of ideas and draws an audience with the agency to act on those ideas, to debate the issues that actually matter. Yes, there's plenty of empty posturing, panels that are PR exercises, but there's also a lot of concrete ideas. Connections are made. Deals that do good are inked. Not all is lost. There's significant power in convening people in person in one place in a world that, from flight shaming and Zoom and work from home, seems to move toward isolationist tendencies at a personal level and a global one. Davos is about open exchange spanning geographies, ideologies, and of course many isms. But after all, don't we all want to believe? To believe in progress, in collaboration, that implementation is the challenge, not that maybe we got the entire agenda wrong? The pendulum is still swinging. We are not at a point of no return. Davos 2025 feels like a confirmation that even in a shadowed context, there are still people looking across borders, silos, functions, for solutions to big problems, asking critical questions, and building things that work against the parasitic, the opportunistic, the cynical. We have to live in our built environment, in Davos, in Lagos, in Singapore, or New York. What we build, what we create, holds a record of our values, ways, and means. At WEF, there's an investment and commitment to public exchange that gets writ large in the town of Davos. It is enough to make one imagine that what's possible in a temporary, concentrated way over a few days might still hold the promise that progress is possible, that we are here for good, that our answer to what the intelligent age might hold in store are solutions to difficult problems, light in the darkness, more than just slogans on backlit signs. We have to believe.
Now, while many of the discussions happening here tend to look at things on a national or global scale, it is within cities that more concrete action can take place, resulting in meaningful change. Jeff Merritt is the head of urban transformation at WEF and someone who has been working to ensure cities continue to be at the top of the agenda. He told me how a local initiative was now going global. Let's take a listen.
What is Yes SF first? What we started doing, this is about, I guess we announced this 2 years ago in Davos. We announced that we were going to do a place-based innovation challenge, but this just wasn't about running a challenge, finding a bunch of innovators. It was about actually making sure that those startups and entrepreneurs were going to physically relocate to a city, one particular city, in this case San Francisco, or set up operations there and then deploy their solutions. And the expectation was they're going to deploy those solutions in 6 to 9 months. We're going to make sure those solutions were directly aligned with advancing the city's climate action goals and its economic development goals, and so the city was bought in from day one. And what happened? We dramatically decreased the time to deployment. So something that might take 3 years normally, where you're going through pilots and trying to build up trust, because we had the community around the table, the government, key stakeholders there, we were able to move fast. And what we're seeing very quickly in San Francisco is a revitalization, a diversification of the downtown economy, and a whole lot of really exciting companies that are not just growing and creating jobs, but they're creating sustainable solutions that are making the city greener and ultimately better place to live. Now what we're doing, we're taking that abroad, and we're already have commitments now that this year we're going to have a Yes Cities in India, so it's going to be quite a different environment, but that's what this is all about. It's iterate as we go, but at the core, how do we mobilize partners from public and private to do real action on the ground?
And that's what this week is all about. It's about gathering people from all over the globe, partners from public, private sector, from different industries really, to pull in their ideas, their expertise, their investment to advance cities. So how are you feeling? We're nearly at the end of this year's annual meeting. Are you feeling positive? Have you been having inspiring conversations?
I am incredibly excited. And I will tell you, I was not sure going into this week. I've been coming to Davos now since, I think, 2018. January 2018 was my first time. And every year there's a different energy, a different vibe. And obviously we all know coming into this that the first day of the annual meeting was the inauguration of President Trump in the United States. And so I think coming in there was this haze and uncertainty, and people didn't know how were people going to respond to this. And I can tell you that there is such incredible excitement. There is such a drive for action. And the reason that that's exciting for me and for any of us who care about cities is if you want to get things done, you work in cities. So regardless of if we're talking about how do we accelerate work on EVs and enable EV charging, how do we make sure that we're building better, greener, how do we make sure that we're creating vibrant, more inclusive economies, all that work is going to get going and it's going to focus on cities, and we're seeing a lot of great momentum and a desire to collaborate. And that's what this organization is all about.
We are talking at a time where there is a challenging period for cities globally, and a lot of those challenges have been addressed here in discussions, particularly regarding growth. That was one of the 5 key sub-themes of the annual meeting. And, we're looking a lot to how our cities are aging, but there's the other flip side, which is what it means for the younger generations, perhaps those more impacted by the isolation forced by the pandemic. And I know you've been attending a couple of sessions on that actually show that there is hope for the future of cities.
There's not just hope. I think the future is incredibly bright. And, if I want to know why, I look to my daughters. My daughters are big Swifties. And what did we learn from Taylor Swift? We've learned maybe a lot, but one of the things we learned is that people want to go to events. People want to go to not only live music, people want to go out to sporting events. We saw that with the Olympics, right? People want to interact together. They don't want to sit around at home by themselves, right? And that brings greater happiness. That brings ultimately a lot of growth for our local economies, because what we know is for every dollar that you spend on a sporting event, going to a restaurant, at least 70 cents on that dollar stays in the community. And what that means is it goes to wages of employees, it goes into supply chains, and then it creates that multiplier effect. And so one of the things that I'm so excited about this week is we're seeing a broad range of companies that work in the area of the experience economy, the visitor economy, travel and tourism. They're all recognizing they're seeing exponential growth post-pandemic in these types of experiences and that economy. But the only way in which that economy can continue to grow is if they work with communities. And we saw that in Venice, for example, where you have a city that used to be 500,000 people that's now down to about 50,000 residents. It's basically just lost its soul. It's lost its community. But as we begin to work together with the industry and we look at how do we make sure that as we're bringing in, new investment, that's delivering value for not only the visitors but the residents, then we can ultimately make our cities stronger, and we can see a path to growth, a path to economic prosperity that really benefits more and all residents.
You are, of course, the head of urban transformation at WEF, and it is indeed a time where cities are transforming in ways that would be difficult to have envisioned just 20, 30 years ago. When you look towards the future and you're meeting with all these, creatives, entrepreneurs, local leaders, mayors who have long-term visions for what their cities, what their communities could look like, is there a particular theme that you can draw from it? Is there a trajectory that you see for the future of urbanization that perhaps you could share with us?
I think the thing that is most inspiring, as you said, is cities are an ecosystem, right? They are artists, they are entrepreneurs, there are established businesses, there's government. And when you bring together those different perspectives, sometimes something that's born there is actually really unique and has elements of each. And so actually that's what we're seeing. We're seeing a bit of the melding of different perspectives and new visions. We had a great event this morning with the Prime Minister of Bhutan talking about the idea of a mindfulness city, a whole different vision for a city that's not chaotic, concrete jungle, but actually is a place that brings happiness and inspires creativity. And that, to me, is the future of our cities.
One of the most pressing challenges the cities of today are facing relates to housing. With most urban areas facing an acute housing crisis, it's essential that stakeholders work together to ensure access to affordable, safe housing for all. So it should come to no surprise that last year UN Habitat appointed Ana Claudia Rosbach as its new executive director, someone with over 20 years of experience in housing, informal settlements and urban policies. She told me all about the new urban agenda, first set in 2016, and where we are today.
So the new urban agenda is a set of principles, actually. We don't have indicators or targets as such, right? So what kind of principles? Principles of including everybody, right? Leaving no one behind, putting housing at the center, participatory multi-level governance, maximizing the built environment, but also recognizing the social and ecological function of the land. These are the types of principles set by the new urban agenda. I do believe we advanced in many countries, in many cities. So if we look, we have, in many cities, master plans that are more clear, that are more transparent, that are less technocratic, and encompasses a broader, comprehensive view of the city, plans that are focused on people, plans that are focused on nature. We have many countries that reviewed their national urban framework, also with laws that are more aligned with the principles of the new urban agenda. I can give you some examples. In Latin America, for example, I like the master plan of the city of Bogota by the former mayor Claudia Lopes. The master plans embeds, for example, a concept of cities of care. So it's really earmarking areas of the city where care facilities need to be connected to housing and support women in their way for work, in their way for the school, education, and so on. So basically, there are equipment such as child care, elderly care, even laundry for women, and at the same time preserving the surrounding environments of the city. So these are the types of advances and progress that we can see out there. But one huge setback, and this is connected to the SDG 11.1, because then, yes, the 2030 agenda sets indicators and real targets, is on housing. Clearly, we are facing a global housing crisis right now. In terms of informal settlements, the statistics that we have show that we have more than 1 billion people living in slums. So we are working in updating this information. But we have signals that in regions, for example, Latin America, after COVID, the impact and potential expansion of informal settlements happen, right? If you look at the numbers of the census from Brazil, it shows an increase. Of course, it is related to the change of the methodology and the fact that the statistics office is able to collect better information working with cities and communities, which is another advance of the new urban agenda. But we have to look seriously at this number and see what happened after COVID. We have a homelessness, historic numbers of people living in homelessness situation, 300 million. All these conflicts are affecting cities and houses. We still have to assess the number of houses also affected by disasters, floodings, fire, etc. So I see that as a stagnation point and as a crisis that we need to tackle. And for me and for UN Habitat, this is the priority focus that we are proposing right in this next phase of the new urban agenda.
You mentioned quite a staggering statistic in the session we just heard, which was that by 2030, nearly 3 billion people would lack access to adequate housing. We know as well that by 2030, the number of people living in cities will increase exponentially. So my question is, how can we ensure we are building more and better in order to provide shelter for everyone who is moving to urbanized areas, who might fall, in the cracks of a system, which is often what happens, and we end up with record numbers of people that are lacking adequate housing?
I will share two main layers on this front. Of course, housing is very complex and is part of an ecosystem. But to simplify, finance and urban. So on the finance framework, we really need to make sure that we have more money flowing into housing in form of public investments, private investments, subsidies, incentives, right? So reorient the financial framework to make sure that funds are flowing to the right places and focus on the right people. On the urban framework, we have to make sure that our laws are up to date at the national level and are supportive of master plans, urban plans that really foresee the provision of housing, that really work with the local communities, the social sector, the academia, the organized community leaders, the private sector, to identify on the ground where housing can be located. Because housing will not be built in the abstract. We need land. Right? And I mentioned before the social and ecological function of the land. Right now, cities are growing more in territory than in population. So do we have opportunities in the cities to build houses? Do we have vacant and underutilized spaces in cities where we can put social housing? How can we make sure that we build with quality and better located so that women, children, they have access, to schools, to jobs, to opportunities, to culture, everything that a city can offer? Can we rethink the way we live and think about different typologies of housing? So taking one single house, family house, and transforming in 3, 4, 5? Can we think about changing the densities of our cities in a respectful manner to the urban fabric, to the culture, to the context, to the environment, to the social needs? Yes, we can, right? But this requires a mind shift. So for me, making finance work, making urban planning and laws work, matching them both is a challenge. And we can only achieve this challenge, only overcome this challenge if there is a mindset shift, a cultural shift.
Something as well that is sort of related to what we've been discussing about the housing crisis, but affects cities even beyond just housing, is of course climate and climate change. And cities account to 70+% of all emissions, yet they're not treated as places where this could be properly addressed unless there's some very clear leadership in place. So what are some of the things you are trying to do when engaging with city leaders, when engaging with private sector as well, bringing all these stakeholders together to ensure that we can address climate change in cities? I mean, we are seeing right now the effects that is having around the world. Los Angeles is literally on fire as we speak. We've been living in a period where people were able to ignore it because it wasn't in our backyard, and right now it is. So tell me a bit about the work that UN Habitat has been doing here.
Maybe 3 avenues, right, to be practical. One is at the ground level. So we have many projects. We are working with many cities in many countries of the world. 90 countries we are working. And in many of these places, we are working with cities to make sure that they are able to address climate-related challenges, right? In terms of resilience, in terms of improving adaptation, but also mitigation, urban plans, housing, as we mentioned before, to make sure that land is properly used and the systems work in a way that will not stress even more the climate concerns that we have, and on the other way, help us to mitigate, to adapt, and to overcome. So a second avenue is around knowledge and practices. So we have awards, we have the World Urban Forum, where we bring practitioners from all over the world. It happens every second year. We have different platforms of exchange with cities, for example. So at a more network, global scale, training, capacity building, as leveraging, gathering knowledge around that. We have a huge opportunity right now because the next IPCC report will be on cities. So we are doing our homework in mobilizing the research community to generate as much as possible contributions for this report. The third avenue is on advocacy. So in the last 3 COPs, we had a full day to discuss urbanization issues, where we bring ministers of housing, urban development, but also local and regional governments, associations, organizations that gather local governments like EUCLG, C40, ICLEI, the Global Covenants of Mayors, and we discuss with them what are the challenges, how we can overcome the challenges together on the different sectors, how can we bring more finance. In the last discussion in Baku, we had the roundtable with the IFIs to discuss how can we leverage finance towards the urban sector and also to local and regional governments. We discussed inclusiveness, we discussed the challenge of transportation. We are now working on the themes for the next COP in Brazil. Hopefully we'll have also robust space to discuss that and bring stakeholders together. We have a joint initiative called CHAMP, where local governments in 74 countries set up a platform to collaborate and leverage this aspect of climate change at the city level. And we are also working with some countries and with the global community to see if we can increase the number of countries that include urban NDCs, right? Right now, only 27% of the countries reported urban NDCs. So this will be the third avenue. So advocacy, knowledge and practices, and then technical assistance and action on the ground.
Now, it's not just about the right to adequate housing, but also about the power buildings and architecture can have to lift entire communities. This has permeated much of the work of 2024 Pritzker Prize laureate Riken Yamamoto. His work carefully blurs the lines between public and private, putting people, dignity and quality of life first.
I sometimes decide a design, but every time we need a communication with the people using the building. So its communication is most important thing for me. So I could understand what should I design for such kind of architecture. Sometimes to design is not so difficult because many communication already we have. After that, the architecture is a very strong power for user or client and many people. That's the main work for architect.
Your work is famous for this blending of private, public, creating communication. And I wonder, you've worked in so many different countries, different markets. That adds another layer of communication. So it's not only private and public, but between your language and the language of that place. So I guess what is the most challenging part when approaching a new design in a new country and making sure all these links are made?
It's not so difficult because every time we should decide what is the meaning of the public, what is the meaning of the private. Every time we decide at the moment of making architecture. It's not a general answer, no general answer. What is the private? What is the public? Every time very specific. So if we make a very small building, one house, or the very, very small piece, it's very similar if you make your own house. But it's something that even the small house, what is the meaning of the public? What is the meaning of the private? I did like that. Every time I think we should have a communication.
Now, you said something this evening that for me was very emotional when you were talking about architecture being the memory of community. That's a really powerful sentence. Can I get you to elaborate on that?
Thank you very much. So that's my understanding. So with the architecture is very powerful every time. So anytime, so I have that something like a decision with the client. For me, it's not so difficult to make architecture with a power. How to explain that? The meaning of the architecture with a strong relation to the community. So I explained that community people need architecture because their memory to touch the next generation every time. So the architecture is necessary to button touch to the next generation. The many generations use the same architecture. So it's the memory of the community. The many people remember that someone died at the place, someone born at the place. The community people remember that. That's the architecture is very, very important for the symbol of the community. And also the community people have their own philosophy. So it's continuity by the kind of the architecture. So that's I would like to say, the symbol of the community. People come back to the community with architecture. Many people would like to come back to the place because this is a memory of the community. Not only the family, but also the many people living together. That's the important thing. Living together is the meaning of the community.
We don't need to get political, but I'm curious to hear your views on after a war ends, how important it is that the rebuilding happens in the correct way to build the community, to make that place safe again for people. What role can architecture play to rebuild community after war, after disaster, after catastrophic events?
The community people, it's very difficult. If we destroyed everything, no architecture, no village, it's really difficult to continuity of the community. That's a very dangerous thing. So now in the world, it's many buildings destroyed, village destroyed. That's a really dangerous thing, I think. So remain the building. Even it's only the very small thing or only the basement, we should rebuild the community and rebuild the architecture. We should keep the architecture itself. But sometimes it's very difficult. For instance, Gaza, we should stop to destroy the architecture. Not only Gaza, but also the Ukraine is also similar thing. In Japan also, after the World War II, all the world village destroyed by the American bombing. We have no tradition after that. So Japanese people thinking changed at that moment. So we should keep architecture.
Because you destroy memory.
That's right. That's right.
But cities cannot grow without investment. While different cycles of financial crisis might have made some wary about their potential, that's not the case for all. Enter Hines, the global real estate firm which is at the forefront of sustainability changes in urban development. David Steinbach is Hines' global chief investment officer, and he told me why we should all be optimistic about urban living.
I think the cities are getting reworked as we speak, and I think that is part of the opportunity set, is to be part of that conversation and to put your hands on the clay and help to figure out what's next. And so embedded in that is some optimism, because I think that the opportunity for us all is to create cities we want to live in and that will attract talent. I do think when you look at the meta-narrative, though, of what's occurring around us, one of the key themes clearly is demographics are shifting and labor continues to be tight. And this fight for labor, I think, is only going to increase. And I think that makes cities ever more relevant in this next chapter than they have been before. And I think that things like the data revolution that's happening in front of us, the AI revolution, all these things are occurring. And yes, it will enable more distributed talent and other things to make it more effective and give people more flexibility. But at its core, people are hungry for relationships and hungry for human contact and ways to collaborate and interact in creative ways. And that happens in a city.
That brings me to the point, and we've been sort of discussing this throughout the last 5 years, ever since the world is still recovering from the effects of the pandemic and what that meant for urban living. But the return to the office, the return to downtowns, the importance of retail spaces, a lot of cities have struggled with that. In others, it's been more immediate, but particularly in the US, there are several cities that are still trying to go back to the pre-pandemic levels. How are you reading those moves in the market?
What's interesting right now about the economic cycle that we're in, there's a lot of reasons to be optimism, and I think capital will return to the table in a way it's been on the sidelines before. With that said, the cost of capital is higher now than it was a few years ago, meaning the bar is higher. And what that means is that a lot of new projects simply don't pencil anymore financially. And development supply really all around the world has very much abated. And the exact stats move around a little bit, but in the United States, in 2027, projected to be about 2 million square feet of office to be developed in the whole country, which is an astounding statistic in terms of a low. And what that means is that we're going to have to get more creative about what we have. And we're going to have to be thinking more about how we repurpose, how we redevelop what we have. And I think that's actually an exciting thing, because I think constraints breed creativity. And I think in this moment of needing to earn the commute and creating great spaces that people thrive in and love to be in, that will take a tremendous amount of creativity. But I think that we also have to look at the broader picture and see the constraints of capital. But again, I think that'll breed creativity and new ideas.
Do you feel that there is room for growth in the property industry?
Absolutely. I think it will take its own shape. And again, it's going to look different than it did before. I think we're going to see a lot of blurring of lines. And we're already seeing that today, and that's been playing out.
In what sense?
Well, so for example, the line between retail and logistics, the grocery store just down the street from my house, whenever I go to it, it's filled with grocery delivery services that are picking product off the shelf. So is that last mile logistics, or is that a retail center? And further, I think about the Amazon purchase of Whole Foods. and how Amazon is using Whole Foods as a way to make it easier to use Amazon, right? Return your packages there. But people normally they stroll on into the store and buy things. And so that's been driving consumer traffic there. Again, a blurring of line. I think those lines are getting blurred also with office and living. And there's a lot of other areas, I think, where those lines get blurred. I think it's interesting. I think there's some really interesting things can come out of that.
And that's all for this week's special episode of The Urbanist, coming to you from the World Economic Forum's annual meeting in Davos. Remember, you can get new editions of the show every week. Just follow us through your favorite podcast provider. The Urbanist is produced by myself and by David Stevens, who also edits the show. I'm Carlota Rebelo. Goodbye, and thank you for listening, City Lovers.